had this series called Sexiest Languages, which is where we would tie the eyes of a person. They'd have to listen to a bunch of languages. We did different series with that. And so that was my personal creation. And so one day BuzzFeed did the same. And of course, they have a bigger budget, they have a bigger team, and their video went viral. And then people started commenting my channel saying, oh, she stole that from BuzzFeed. And that would really irk me. I would say, well, go back and check the original video. That was my video, you know? So that was kind of a slap in the face. What happened afterwards?
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of My Rejection Story. Today, I am really excited to be joined by Marina Iakovleva. Marina is the creator and host of Dating Beyond Borders, which is a YouTube channel that has almost 1 million subscribers, where she explores cultural differences and cross-cultural relationships through creative, insightful storytelling. She's also a podcast host, and she interviews international creators, writers, and psychologists, diving into the complexities of living abroad and forming connections across cultures. As a professional speaker, Marina shares powerful insights on how culture shapes our worldview and teaches strategies for building meaningful relationships both personally and professionally. She's also the author of Sex Before Coffee, a guide to dating in Scandinavia, and her research has been featured in major media outlets including HuffPost, Buzzfeed, and the Daily Mail. Marina, welcome to My Rejection Story.
Thank you for having me on the podcast, Alice.
I'm so excited to have you here. Okay, so before we dive in, well, I guess this is just diving in, what is your earliest memory of rejection?
Ooh, we're going deep right away. Honestly, I was a very awkward kid growing up in general. I mean, I grew up in Moscow in Russia, and one of the biggest fears that I've always had was doing something wrong. So I was this like little scrawny kid that would shake every single time I would get called to the board. And in Russia, education is quite brutal. And so you get thoroughly embarrassed in front of your classmates every single time you need to answer a question. You get called to the board and, you know, you have to basically be put on the spot. And so every time I would get called to the board, I just hated it. The kids used to make fun of me and say I was doing like a little dance in front of the board because my hands would shake, my legs would shake. I hated speaking in front of people, which is kind of funny, isn't it? How I now speak, and I was a teacher as well prior to starting this. But I was just really, really scared of everything growing up. I mean, I think a lot of it hasn't gone away. I mean, we all have anxiety over one thing or another. I still hate flying, for example, which is also ironic because I do it so much. But I was just so scared of everything going wrong. You know, like, oh no, you know, I would find something. It's okay, this is cancer. So, or I would, you know, just think of all the worst case situations that might happen to me, as I was always like a little anxious kid. And so I suppose it was just a difficult time growing up because of that. And I guess a lot of us, we don't feel like we fit in, but I definitely didn't. I was always doing things fast, and I was always talking too much. And again, when I came to Canada and I was 12, kids used to make fun of me because I was this weird Russian kid who was, I don't know, just always like kind of awkward and fidgety and yeah, I still have that. I still have that, and I still struggle with that. It's not like it went away, but I think at the end of the day, it's these quirks that make us really unique and interesting, you know, as opposed to being highly polished. People relate well to relatability and this kind of quirkiness, which is why, in a way, I've been able to kind of use that to my advantage, you know, down the road. But yeah, I guess if I could sum up my childhood, it would be that.
Yeah, and I think really interesting. We'll definitely dive into how you were once the anxious kid and terrified, hands shaking, standing in front of, you know, a classroom, giving a talk, and you're now an international speaker. I think it's, life works in strange ways. But going back to your story, so you said that you kind of always were risk averse from what I'm hearing, and now you run this YouTube channel, you run this very successful company. Talk to me a little bit about how you shifted from there's that version, you would think that with that personality type, you would have gone for something very predictable. And here you are doing something very unpredictable.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I think about a lot. I think so I moved to Canada when I was 12, and I think part of me always felt like I didn't really belong in Canada because I moved when I was young and I didn't really have a sense of home. And so I think that was one of the driving forces, in terms of starting what I'm doing right now, is that I just always felt a little bit like an outsider, like I didn't really have that place to call home. And I still really, really struggle with that. More so now, actually. But so I think that was one of the reasons. I also, it's weird. I don't really know what it is about my personality that really got me to where I am. But part of it was even when I was growing up, I was studying to be a teacher, and there was just always this voice inside of me that I want to do something more. I want to do something bigger. It just felt really, really confining. And when I started working as a teacher, it was okay. It was
Yeah.
like, like I wrote this on LinkedIn, but it was like a good stable relationship, but no sparks or anything. And so, it was a decent job, but I just wasn't excited about it. And, even leading up to being a teacher, I was like, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I'm supposed to settle down and have this really mature, job. And, this is how life is supposed to work out. But even leading up to becoming a teacher, I tried out a bunch of jobs. I worked at the airport. I was an extra in movies. I worked in an all-inclusive resort in Mexico. So I did all these odd jobs because I just felt like, okay, at some point I need to settle down and I need to start living the adult life, right? Like right now
Yeah.
we know that there's no such thing, that we can do things whenever we want them to. But at this stage of life, there was like a lot of pressure to have things figured out. And when I started the job as a teacher, I just remember I was surrounded by people who were really dissatisfied with their lives. They were talking about the things that they could be doing, but they weren't doing. And it just really made me feel like I was not in a place I wanted to be. I was 26 and I wanted to be traveling the world, and I was doing what I was thinking was right, but it just didn't really feel right. And so I think I was 28 when I don't know. I started traveling a little bit more, and I can talk a little bit more about the actual idea for dating beyond borders, but I just always had this drive to travel, and coming back to Canada just felt really boring and predictable, and it just felt like, is this it? Is this going to be my life? And so at a certain point, I just realized that I wanted to do something different, like there's like an energy you get. I think Mel Robbins talks about this, where she says, where it's something that you really want to do, you may be really scared of it, but your energy feels like it's expanding, not contriving. And so it's like a sense of possibility. And, years down the line when I started this business, I realized there's kind of like a sense of possibility that I wake up with every day, something I didn't have when I was going, to work as a teacher. When I was working as a teacher, sorry, just felt like my whole life was laid out. And yeah, I think there was always like a gravitational pull to that because I'm the kind of person that doesn't really I try to think back on my life, why I do the things that I do and what I want my life to be going forward. Because I realized one day I'm going to wake up when I'm 80 and realize I've just wasted my entire life doing what I was supposed to be doing and living someone else's life. And that's a scary, scary place to be. And I don't know about you, Alice, but I don't regret the things that I've done. I regret the things that I didn't do. I think like most people. And the more I listen to people, the more I realize we're all so scared, but we're all living in a life of regrets, thinking, oh, you're so lucky. Like, I wish I could do that, but I just can't. Like every time I'm on a plane, actually, I have this conversation with someone. They'll say, yeah, how long are you going for? And I'll say, yeah, I'm just going to spend the summer here and there. And they'll say, oh, you're so lucky. I wish I could do that, but I can't. And I say, well, can't you? Are you sure? And they say, yeah, and it's like, we do this to ourselves. We put this imaginary jail, even though like,
Yeah.
I think Lori Gottlieb says this, like, you can get out of this jail. Like it's a self-inflicted jail that like, I cannot do this. Why?
I love that. That was in maybe you should talk to someone, right? She writes about that. I don't know, or maybe she
Yes.
spoke about it as well on her podcast. Yeah, so the term for what you're describing is regret minimization, and I just love it so much. I never knew that this term before I just spoke about it because I remember someone asking me some time ago, like, how did you end up doing what you're doing? And I explained my thought process, and it was like, what will I regret more? Will I regret trying this thing, putting everything into it, and it not working out, or not trying? And it was always, I would definitely regret not trying, because at least if it doesn't work out, you know. And so I think that's so amazing that you were able to identify that you wanted to minimize regrets, because I think a lot of people walk around life and they never kind of make that realization that the actions they're taking, there are things they might regret later. As you said, we often regret the actions we don't take. So, just carrying on and going with the flow, which is so easy. But just like you said, going along the less common path is, it's scarier, but it's probably not one that we will regret. So you have alluded a little bit to this. You have Russian descent, and I believe you also have Ukrainian descent, and you moved to Canada when you were 12. Did that, I'm sure it did, but what kind of impacts did that have on, I guess, who you are and how you view the world?
Yeah, great question. Something, again, I think about a lot because I run a podcast and I have a channel about intercultural dating. So culture comes up a lot. And for me, I think one really good quality, there are many qualities that I struggle with when it comes to Eastern European mentality. But one of the ones that I really like is that it's a culture, Russian, Ukrainian, these are cultures that like to go deep. And I think one thing that I've kind of struggled with in Canada is that it's a kind of very, let's say, careful culture where people are really scared to get to the deep end. And so in conversations, I like to really get to the bottom of who the person is. Like I don't mind small talk as long as we can get to the good stuff. If you and I meet Alice in an elevator and we'll be like, oh, how is the weather? And then you break rapport and you say, well, I've been there and there, and I'll say, how did you like it? And you say, it was really, really terrible. For me, that's a good small talk because then we can get to the deep end right away and we're not staying on the safe topics. And this is the kind of person I am. And I think this has actually helped me in creating the channel because I'm interested in people. Obviously, I was a high school teacher, so I like being around people, but I'm also really interested in the psychology of people, which I'm pretty sure you can relate to because you have your podcast, which is all about rejection, which is really a psychological kind of conversation, right? Or sociological as well. But, so yeah, that's one of the qualities where I like to be direct with people. I like to say it how it is. I don't mind some of the niceties. Like I don't like people being rude to my face, but I also just like to be real with people, and I struggle a lot when someone is like being very polite, but I can see that like there's a weirdness there, when they're like smiling a lot, they're like, oh wow, that's amazing. I
Feels like
really
a
struggle with
wall.
that.
Sorry to
Exactly. And
interrupt you, but if it feels like there's a wall between me and them, it's just like, oh, we can't connect. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That's exactly how I feel. And I don't know how to act in that situation. I don't know how to respond to someone if they're really smiley and polite. And okay, but how do we get somewhere from here? So I really do like a little bit of vulnerability and quirkiness, or a lot of vulnerability rather, in people. And when people say what they really think, I really, really appreciate that. I really, really enjoy that. And, having talked to a lot of Eastern Europeans, I realized that's not just me. That's like a very Eastern European quality. So I think part of it is, of course, that I also think when you're born in another country and you come and you immigrate, you're never really belong to one place. And maybe that's made me more curious about cultures and also trying to figure out what my identity was, because I never really felt like I fit into Canadian culture or also the dating scene. It just didn't really work for me, and I think that has made me really struggle to find like what is a place I could call home. Unfortunately, still none. And just, where do I belong? Yeah.
This question, where do I belong? So before I get into that, what you're saying about small talk, I completely relate to. I'm awful at small talk. It's so boring, and I'm very guilty of making things deep when I guess people don't expect them to be, like at networking events and stuff. So yeah, totally relate to that. But you've touched on, I guess, a sense of having a bit of a fractured identity, which is because you moved to Canada when you were 12. You didn't feel like you quite belonged in that cultural context, and there's other backgrounds. And I think it's a very interesting concept. I grew up in South Africa, and I never felt disconnected from South Africa, but I felt disconnected from my hometown. And then I ended up living in the Middle East, and I now am reckoning with the fact that I feel like will never belong in just one place. I feel too, my identity feels too fractured, but I didn't have what you had growing up, where I'm sure you were reckoning with the question, where do I belong, at a much younger age. So yeah, what kind of insights have you kind of emerged from that question, where do I belong, and how are you sitting with that question right now?
Yeah, I'm always jealous of people who are like, oh, I was born in, I don't know, Ireland, and I really love Ireland. I don't want to stay here my whole life and I never want to move. Like I really genuinely, if this person has never stepped foot outside of their country, but they're happy where they are, I have a little bit of an envy for that because I think the more you see, the more you know, the harder it is to choose. I think that's the issue with our lives these days when it comes to literally everything from online dating to online shopping. It's like you just have this variety of things at your disposal. And you know, you probably know this, but I think people have a certain amount of choices that they can be presented with before they have a bit of a paralysis of choice. So it's like I think six is the max. If you go to a store and you see six of this, you know, you can safely choose. More than that, you get overwhelmed. So I think that's kind of what happened to me because again, I don't have that place, but also you have you have Instagram and you have TikTok and people are always sharing the best places to live in. And this place is great because of this, and this place is great because of that. We all know that even if you're having a really okay day, then someone else is having a better day somewhere else. You're going to think, well, what am I doing here? I think that the issue for me has been also that I've definitely felt like this for a while about living in Canada, but I also work online. And so there's not really like a sense of belonging to a place unless you have a really strong network, you have a family, you have a job. I don't really have a job. I don't really have, except for my like family, I don't have like a spouse or kids. And so that becomes much more difficult in terms of, okay, am I really rooted to this place and what is really keeping me here? And I have lived in Europe. I've lived in Portugal. 2 years, 3 years ago, I was there for a couple of years, and I definitely felt like a lot more relaxed there. I also think, um, you know, Southern Europe, there's certain places that evoke different feelings in people. And for me, and also I think certain places are better for certain people. You know, for example, certain people love New York. I can't stand New York. I mean, I like it for a couple of days, but it's just not the energy that I'm looking for. It's a little bit too fast paced. It makes me feel overwhelmed. There's too much stuff to do. I'm also not in my 20s where I want to be going out and partying. And so I'm looking more for quality and slow life and actual, healthy lifestyle. And so that can also shift throughout your lifetime. Your priorities change a lot. But also certain places, like I said, speak to certain people. And Toronto has never spoken to me. It's just not my place. And in Portugal, I felt a lot more calm. I had less stress. I enjoyed little things more. I don't know. It just felt more in line with who I am as a person. And so actually in a week, I'm leaving to Spain for the summer because I don't know where I belong, but I might as well be somewhere that I enjoy. So it's kind of where I'm at right now. I know it sounds very first world problems, but it's a difficult situation to be in. I know people are going to laugh at me, but it really is because I think it's wonderful to have a sense of home. And it's wonderful to come back home and say, it could be minus 20 here, but I don't care. I love it. I feel so good here. My family's here. My life is here. Like, I really, really think that's a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just traveled to South Africa on Sunday and I'm here for the next few months. So I think I also am facing that kind of first world problem of like, where is a fulfilling place to live? And I think that it's probably a luxury that we have because we're location independent. And so I think there are a lot of people out there who just stay in a place because that's where they're required to be based on work or family or whatever it is. So yeah, like it's a blessing and a curse. I'm like, it's amazing to be able to choose. And it's also like, oh my gosh, where do I want to be in the world? So
Yeah. And just something I wanted
Yeah.
to add on to that because I've read your story, I watched a snippet of your podcast talking about your own personal struggles. I also think, yeah, like I don't want to make it seem like it's easier than it is because I also have, let's say, very close to my family, very close to my mom. So you have those issues, especially when your parents get older. You don't want to be far away from home, and sometimes you have to pick. Do I choose me? Do I choose them? Do I choose constant guilt? Or do I choose, like, what do I choose? That's a really, really hard place to be. The older we get, the older our parents get. So it's not so easy to just be like, yeah, I'm just going to go and, spend the rest of my life in a different place. And I'm totally aware that a lot of people are, they have so many issues that they unfortunately can't get out of. And the only thing you can do in that case is really make the best of your situation because, it is what it is.
Yeah, yeah. So you brought up something interesting, which is, parents aging, and it's a difficult decision, especially as if we make roots abroad, and it's like the parents are across the country or other relatives. How do you navigate any feelings of guilt, knowing whether to choose yourself or put that aside and focus on that? Is that something you are navigating or have navigated?
Oh yeah, that's definitely what I'm navigating right now. Like I'm very incredibly close to my mom. Like she's my best friend. And my mom is the kind of person that I don't know if she would ever move across the country to stay with me somewhere unless she had like a really strong network of people, which of course she's 70, she won't build at this age. It's hard. But I also think, and I'm still kind of trying to figure it out. But I also think at the end of the day, it's, what they say, it's so cliche, but it's in the case of emergency, put your own mask on first. And I think in a way, when you stay in a place that you really don't like, when you stay in a position that you really hate, you're not a person someone wants to be around. And you not only are miserable, but you make others miserable. And then you start blaming others for your mistakes, essentially become a victim. And so unless you really, really own that decision, if you feel like someone else kind of forced you into the situation, then you're going to make life harder for everyone as a result. And I've seen that on myself being, coming back from Portugal and saying, you know what, I'm just gonna make it work. Like, I'm just going to stay here. I was in a relationship and I made it work for everyone else. But at the end of the day, I kind of realized that me being miserable is not helping anyone else. I also think that when you are in a place that you really, really don't like, you show up really, really differently. And that energy kills you because let's say you're looking for a relationship. Let's say you want to date somebody. Well, let's say you're in a place that you really hate and you're trying to go on dates. You're going to go on these dates. You're going to be complaining about your life. You're going to be complaining about where you're at. They're going to say, oh, I know this really cool bar. You'll say, yeah, I've been there. Like, I don't like it. I don't like the city. And I've been there. That's why I'm sharing this, where I've just been not that excited to try things. Having lived in Portugal, I was excited about everything. I was excited about, oh, I'm going to take up surfing. I'm going to do Portuguese lessons. I was excited about the little things. And I was like a little kid in a candy store. I was just excited. And when you're in that excited energy, you show up differently. You're more beautiful as a result, And you look better, your skin is better, you're more active, you're more even interested in meeting people, and as a result you get more connections. And so I think when you stop prioritizing yourself, then you fall into a rut and your life can really go topsy-turvy in a place where you don't really want.
Yeah, yeah. Putting your mask on first, I think, is so important and a powerful reminder. And you also have just touched on dating, which I'd love to get into. I know that's a big topic that you explore. And yeah, this idea that as you were talking and describing, you're not going to show up as your best self if you are miserable where you are and you're trying to date. And if you are happy, the skin will glow and you will just be a much more enthusiastic person. I never thought of that before, and it makes total sense. It makes sense why, like, holiday romances are so common, because you're this adventurous, excited version of yourself that maybe you're not at home. And I know I've had that experience with traveling, is that, like, my dating life seems so much better while traveling than it did back home. So, yeah, talk to me a little bit about dating, and I guess some of your early dating experiences that made you kind of, I guess, come to this realization.
In terms of a realization of what? Of that it's better to be
That
abroad, or?
Yeah, that when you are in a place you love, you show up better in dating. So was there, when you alluded to that there was a version of you that didn't show up as, I guess, your best version when you were dating. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, Alice, you've just basically described my entire life history, which is how the channel actually initially started. Is I my life could be described best as a series of long distance encounters. I mean, we always start a podcast or we always start a project about things that have either hurt us or something that have we've experienced firsthand, right? So it's no surprise that I've had that. But my first. So actually, it's a really, really funny story. My first experience with real dating, let's just say, was when I went on vacation. And so it's funny you picked up on that. But I have really, really struggled to meet someone in Canada. I have never really felt attracted to the guys that I was dating. I was just kind of going through the motions. Okay, he kissed me. Okay, fine. I wasn't really excited about it. Just kind of felt boring, lackluster, not really interesting. And I went on vacation to the Dominican Republic and I met this German guy. And so it was like a whirlwind kind of romance, typical romance story, 3 days. It was exciting. It was the first time I've met a foreigner before in my life. And he was different. He was more direct. He was more, I don't know, he was just different. It was not like Canadian guys can be kind of very nice, but not very exciting sometimes. Sorry, Canadian guys. Especially Toronto, although, yeah, Quebec is different. And so this guy was completely different to that. And so, long story short, we had these 3 days and I left and I was completely heartbroken because, of course, I went back to Canada. He went back to Germany. I still had the illusion that I was like 22. I had the illusion that we're going to make it somehow work. But of course, he was just thinking of this as a or as a fun little, vacation fling. And so I came back to Canada and I was depressed. It was winter time. I was thinking, okay, I don't want to date anyone here. I really like German guys now. I got this really crazy German fetish where if anyone said anything about Germany, I was there. I was all ears. I was so excited about Germany. And I had this crazy thing for German guys for a really long time after that, actually. And I also had a thing for, well, now in my mind, I thought, in order to meet someone, I need to go on vacation because that was the only fun time and the most exciting time I've had. And so you can describe my 20s as me escaping and going to all these places and trying to recreate that and hoping that at some point I'm just going to meet someone on the plane or I'm going to go and I'm going to meet someone and they're going to sweep me off my feet and say, move with me to, I don't know, whatever country. And we're going to live happily ever after. And so that was my 20s. And actually, that's how the idea for my channel started because I started blogging about experiences that I've had dating internationally. And I started noticing patterns in those interactions that something that I haven't really thought about before. So this German guy, you can say, Sebastian, if you're listening, probably not, but he was actually the trigger for me to start the channel in a way. So it's kind of funny, but I would say like actually that did happen a few years ago that I did, move to Portugal and I met someone in real life and he did sweep me off my feet. He was Dutch, so he didn't really do a lot of sweeping. He was just like, let's live together. And we moved in together really, really fast. And I think was the closest that I've experienced to okay, this like someone from another country invites you to live with them and the end. Unfortunately, it wasn't the end. It was, didn't work out in the end. So yeah, it's really, really like quite a few experiences where I've traveled abroad to meet someone. And you're right. I think it's like there are a couple of things happening is of course we do come out differently on vacation than we are in our home countries because there's just less pressure and there's less expectation. If you're dating in your home country, you're first of all less excited. You're more in your routine. You're doing your regular day things and you're not thinking, oh, this is so romantic, the Mediterranean Sea. Like, no, it's just a regular life. And you're thinking more long term with this person. And I think when you're on vacation, you definitely show up differently because you just have less expectations. It's kind of like a video game. It's like so much fun and it's short term lived, right? So everything is heightened because you have that expiry date where you both go your separate ways. And people are, of course, very different on vacation. People will go and they're exciting and they're fun and they're romantic. I've met someone on vacation and then met them afterwards and it was a completely different person. And then you realize you have nothing in common. It was just their vacation self. So yeah, I think now I'm a lot more rational when it comes to, okay, obviously, vacation flings are vacation flings, and then dating long term is very different.
Yeah, yeah. To your point of, we bring a different self to our vacation. I know that with myself, I was a lot more unfiltered on vacation because as you said, there isn't that long-term element. So it's like, I'll probably never see this person again. So I can just be myself, which is ironically helpful if you want to form a connection. But on the other side, I also have had experiences where someone's been completely different. And I like met someone who I met on a vacation and a couple months later, and I was like, wow, this is very different to the experience that I that I'd had when we were on vacation. So very interesting. I want to know a little bit so if we dive into intercultural relationships, I think that I would love to know, what's very interesting, what you just touched on is that you started dating beyond borders based off the back of the rejection of the German Sebastian. um, so yeah, tell me a little bit, I think if we could dive into that, tell me a little bit about how you were able to turn a rejection, which could be viewed as a setback to many or something that is purely negative, into one of your most successful ventures, which is your really big platform on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, looking back at things, I think it always kind of makes sense, the bigger picture. But when you're in it's a really long road. It's not like in the movies, they have the Rocky montage where it's like 3 minutes,
Yeah.
what is it, like a minute, now all of a sudden, he's achieved all these big things. But in real life, things are not as obvious. We don't often know where we're going to end up. It doesn't make sense when you're in the midst of it. And that's kind of what happened. So that first experience was my first encounter with the foreign men, so to speak. And that made me really obsessed with all things foreign. I kind of realized that maybe Canada wasn't where I was really meant to be finding my true love. And of course, Canada is very multicultural, but I mean, I still wanted to be somewhere else. And so it was like a series of, I'd say, relationships with guys from different countries that I've had throughout my 20s, where I started writing a blog about it. And because I started writing about my observations, like, oh, Dutch people split the bill. I had no idea, literally. I had no idea up to this point. And I was Googling this because I didn't know this was a thing. And there wasn't really a lot out there back in the dark ages of when I'd started this. But, the only things that were out there when it comes to dating around the world were more cringy, like international dating sites with Western guys going to Ukraine to find a bride like 30 years younger. So it was the only thing that was really readily available out there, and other really, really cringy sites. So I became really interested in this topic. As I said, I've started writing about it. I started noticing patterns, and I spent a few, like, I was in Argentina for, let's say, 3 months. I was in Panama for 3 months. I was in Europe. And so I started, like, more or less kind of talking to guys, even the guys that I was dating. I would say, like, in France, what we do in Canada isn't really that common. For example, just the yeah, like gender roles, family values, communication. There are a lot of things there. And I started slowly getting interested in this topic. But I was 28, as I've told you, when I was going to Panama to teach English. I was still a high school teacher at this point. And like I told you, I wasn't really excited about what I was doing. It was just something that I had to do to pay the bills. And so I went to Panama for a few months to teach there. And I had a friend there, and I approached her one night and I said, listen, I've been writing this blog about dating internationally. And I don't know, I just had this really kind of weird idea. But what do you think about we take a camera, back on the day there were no phones. We take a camera and we go around the city and we talk to guys from different countries, and when we ask them the same 5 questions about dating and see how the answers differ. And she said, yeah, let's do it, which I'm really thankful for, because if she hadn't, I would have thought this was a really weird idea. I wouldn't have done it. And so we did that for, I think, a couple of weeks, got some really random weird proposals along the way. But we were like really professional about it. We were like, no, we got to do this, you know. And so at the end, we had this really terrible video that I was editing. It's still on the channel in case anybody wants to take a look. I kept it there because I wanted to remind myself of how far I've come, because it's really horrendous. And so I just remember that feeling of sitting down and editing that really, really terrible video and thinking, this is what I want to do. Like, I don't need a plan B. This is what I want to do. And I remember this feeling with like real clarity, because up until this point, I just didn't really care at all. I didn't really think that I was going to end up doing anything that I was excited about. And this was the kind of defining moment. But of course, after that, I really still struggled for a few years. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. YouTube was really different back in the day. I was still working as a teacher. And so I came back to Canada. I was still working as a teacher. And I would spend my lunch breaks kind of going back and looking at Twitter and looking at all these like inspirational things to see my life, because I really, really wanted to just keep doing this full time. And again, my channel was like barely there. I had no subscribers. I wasn't making any money off of it. And at one point, I think like 2 years after I started, my boss, he just said, you know, unfortunately, I have to let you go. We just don't really have enough enrollment. It was a private school. And so I had that 1 year to figure out what I wanted to do. And a part of me was thinking, well, just go back, you know, get another teaching job. And I remember that feeling of, I was with my friend and we were looking for a job for her and walking into like a bank building, and I just felt suffocated. And I realized I can't do another, obviously, corporate job. I'm not going to do, but I don't want to go back to the same grind. I really don't want to. I was given this chance to do something else with my life. And I started working as an English teacher online with Chinese kids. And I did that in the morning from 5 to 10 in the morning. And the rest of the time I worked on my videos. And I just worked every single day. I would go, even when I was traveling and filming, I would still be teaching, and then I would be doing this the rest of the time. So I think in about a year, I hit 100,000 followers, and then my revenue started. So yeah, that's the somewhat short version of it.
So it took you a year to hit 100,000 followers?
About that, I think before this, I had about 5,000 followers. So yeah.
Wow, that's quite rapid. Like 1 year, 100,000. I know some friends of mine, it took them, I think, like 5+ years to hit 100,000. So you definitely were onto something, and well done for noticing what made you feel really alive and keep doing it. Did you have any moments of doubts? I'm sure you did in the early days of building out the YouTube channel and questioning, I guess, whether this is something you should be spending your time on, and that, yeah, what other people will think. I guess leaning fully into it, how did you navigate those feelings of doubt?
I guess people are going to hate me if I say that I didn't really have a doubt, to be honest. It's
That's
not
amazing.
that you know what, though? It's not that I didn't doubt it. It's just that I loved it so much that it's like a relationship where maybe someone that you're dating isn't everyone's cup of tea, but you're like, no, this is my person, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly how I felt, because I just kind of knew that it was going to work out eventually. Should we?
Sorry, my light is flashing.
No worries. No worries. It happens.
I'll just turn that off. Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, I'll go from the top so we can cut around it. Yeah, I guess it's like when you're dating that person that maybe not everyone likes, but you're like, no, this is my person. I don't care if they look a certain way or whatever. They don't have a job. I really, really love this person. This is the person for me. Or if it's a country that you move to that everyone's like, what? You moved to what? Where did you move? Why? You're living in Sweden? But you love it, you know? And that's how I felt about this project, where I wasn't really sure I was going to make a ton of money. I just knew that, like, I've never been this excited about anything. and I really want to build it to the best that it can be. And of course, I guess like the issues maybe were that people would talk behind my back a little bit. I've had people say, well, she can't find a boyfriend, so she created this channel. I thought, well, you can't find a boyfriend and you're not doing anything about it. I can't find a boyfriend and I'm doing something about it. So I didn't really let it get to me because I knew I was working on something really interesting. But you know what? When I had just started, I remember I was visiting a friend of mine, let's just say, and he and his girlfriend, where we were sitting in the restaurant, and they said, so how's your channel doing? And I said, yeah, it's doing really great. And at this point, I really had barely had any subscribers. And this guy was my ex-boyfriend, so I didn't want him to know that. And they said, well, how many subscribers are you at? And I think I was barely at 1,000. And I lied. I remember I was like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. And I still remember I was so embarrassed that I was so small, and it just, I don't know. I was like 30 years old and just felt kind of silly that I was starting a channel about dating. I think that was one of the big things where I just felt like dating is a kind of a weird topic to focus on. And so, but to say that I thought, no, let me do something else, or just in case this doesn't work out, for whatever reason, that has never crossed my mind. I just was always really, really sure that it would. And it's progressed so much in terms of, I mean, the topic is still fairly similar, but now I focus more on connection because I care less about dating. I care more about the connection because I think that's more important, whether it's relationships, friendships. Obviously, I've added a podcast, I've done a book. So I feel like it's important for people to know as well that you can have a topic, but the format can really, really shift. You can be, for you, focusing on rejection. You can have a podcast about it. You can write a book about it. You can speak about it. There are so many different ways that you can, kind of the mediums in which you can tell the story, that you don't have to always just stay within the same thing. Because even within my channel, I've been doing this for like 10 years now. And with what I was doing, that has shifted a lot as well. Halfway through it, or recently, fairly like a few years ago, I had to kind of say, well, these type of videos don't work anymore for me. I have to completely switch it up or I'm going to lose myself. And so I did that. And then I added a podcast because I told myself for a long time, I want to start a podcast. And so even within what I was doing, I kept changing it a lot. Because what made it interesting for me at 28 is very different now. Who I was at that age was very different. My interests are very different. My priorities, the kind of conversations I can have. Like if you'd had me here when I was 28, we wouldn't have this conversation. I wouldn't say these things to you, It's a lot of like, this, right? Like it's a lot of, you have to have the experience and you have to really analyze. You have to listen to a lot of podcasts and there's a lot of stuff that goes into really figuring out who you are. And, there's an experience that you have to experience to get there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I completely agree. And I think that the evolving, like being able to evolve over time and allowing your content to evolve is difficult. I have seen a lot of creators really struggle with that. And sometimes the audience is not happy because they've come for this very specific thing. I want to learn about travel tips in South Africa. And now the creator is bored of sharing travel tips in South Africa. And so it can upset the audience. So I'm very interested in hearing how you navigated, like kind of hitting this point where you're like, I'm no longer interested in the content that I started off with and I need to shift things. Did you worry about how that would affect the audience and the growth of the channel, and I guess the income you're making from the channel?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started my channel, as I've told you, I really struggled to come up with a format that I wanted to present. And so what really worked for me was creating a skit style series, which is called You're Dating. So it would essentially be two actors. Let's say it would be a video on, you're dating a French woman, and it would be an American guy dating a French woman. And we would go through it. It was like a little short film that I would film either in Toronto, or I would film it in France, or I would film it wherever I was. And so you get the visuals, you get the funny storyline. People loved it. It wasn't the only thing I was doing. I was also doing studio videos. And so that was what I was known for. I was known for the, you're dating. I was like that actor that gets, put into that role and stays there. Like, I don't know what a good example would be, but you get the point. And so
I think
I did that for a really long
time. To give you an example, sorry, Rebel Wilson was recently talking about how she decided to lose weight and she was told, you're not allowed to. Well, everyone was warning against it because they said she's built a name as, the fat actress, the funny fat actress. So carry on.
Exactly. No, that's a great example because I also read her memoir and she was talking about that where she said it wasn't healthy, but I also needed to kind of take care of myself. I can't just be this funny punch bag, you know? And so that's really hard, right? Because she had to kind of focus on herself and prioritize herself versus what everyone else expected her to be. She also had a baby and anyways, so for me, it was the same. I really, really loved that series. But first of all, it was really time consuming. It was really expensive. It took us 8 hours to film that in a given day. And that did include the research and the money I would spend into, there were props. It was like an actual like short movie that, I had to put together. And if I was on location, I'd have to find a videographer or I'd have to travel with my videographer. Man, that was a lot of work. But people loved it, and so at a certain point, I kind of had to say, and this was maybe like a few years back, I kind of had to say, you know what? I can't really continue that because it's stressing me out. I can't go on vacations anymore without thinking I need to film a video, and I had to kind of sit down and say, okay, what do I want to do that's going to be less effort, but still in line with what I'm doing. And of course, still to this day, people say, oh, why didn't you create you're dating a Dutch woman when? I'm still waiting for that. Well, it's not happening because I don't want to do it anymore. But I totally understand them because that's what I was known for. But also to keep in mind that YouTube trends also change. And this is not a trend anymore. People don't make skit videos anymore. That's not a thing. It is on Instagram and TikTok, but not on YouTube. And so I had to sit down because at this point I was thinking, okay, what do I do? Should I continue filming videos in a studio? That was also a hassle because I was dealing with cancellations all the time. And like, you're counting on a certain amount of people being there. If someone cancels, then you don't have the amount of people. You don't have a certain country represented. And so this was a bit of a hassle. It was really stressing me out. I was spending a lot of time doing this, but I still wanted to keep in line with the dating around the world. And so I sat down and the videographer I was working with at the time said, well, you should do challenge videos because they're doing so well. Everybody's doing a challenge video. And I thought, okay, maybe I should because everyone's doing them, even though it didn't really speak to me at all. I was like, that's not what I want to do. So I did those challenge videos and they tanked because that's not what my channel was. I was just copying someone, And so I was thinking, okay, what do I want to show on my channel? What is the most important quality about my channel to me? And for me, it was the cultural element. It was how cultural differences kind of affect the way we see the world, the way we see each other, the way we see connection. So that was number one. And number two was relationships, of course. So dating, friendships, whatever, like within that realm. And so I was thinking, well, how do I want to do that? And then I just kind of decided that I'm going to do it on location with people that actually live in those locations and actually have those conversations with them. And in some videos, I do it more of a documentary style. So I have a video, this is the loneliest country, and that's about Sweden. And so in that video, I combined the interviews with actual research to give people more of an in-depth look at culture. But also to be really transparent with you, with a podcast, this as you run the podcast, the amount of time I'm able to, put into my main YouTube channel has dwindled because I just don't have that time available to me. And I don't really have a big team or anything. So, I basically prioritize my podcast now because it's easier. It's also for me kind of what I see as the future, and I enjoy it more because I want to have these deep conversations. So it's also, you have to prioritize certain things over the other unless you have a big team and you're able to manage it all, in which case, congratulations. But I'm not there, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing and being so candid about that. Would you ever consider putting your your podcast episodes up on your YouTube channel?
Well, I have a separate YouTube channel just for my podcast. So I have that. But on my main YouTube channel, I keep it just for those videos. So I try to separate the two.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I really love having my podcast on my YouTube channel because I think the visual element is really important for me personally because I come from the YouTube world. And so it just makes sense for me to do that. I also can get more money on YouTube as opposed to just relying on Spotify and, Apple, whatever. So, yeah, I do a little bit of both.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing. I heard that you went through a path phases in your growth, your YouTube growth, where your ideas were getting stolen by outlets that were much bigger than you, like Buzzfeed. Those sorts of setbacks, did they ever demotivate you or make you feel like, why are you doing this? How did you navigate them?
That's a great observation. You did some good research. Yeah, that did happen, and unfortunately, so I had this series called Sexiest Languages, which is where we would tie the eyes of a person. They'd have to listen to a bunch of languages. We did different series with that, and so that was my personal creation. And so one day, BuzzFeed did the same. And of course, they have a bigger budget, they have a bigger team, and their video went viral. And then people started commenting my channel saying, oh, she stole that from BuzzFeed. And that would really irk me. I would say, well, go back and check the original video. That was my video, you know? So that was kind of a slap in the face. What happened afterwards, and this is, by the way, I'm happy you asked me this question because this is one of the reasons that I actually shifted my channel as well, is because of the studio videos that I was producing. I did enjoy those, but at the same time, at some point, a few years ago, there was a Korean channel called World Friends, and they essentially started doing exactly the same style of videos. But here's the caveat. They posted every single day, and they obviously had a giant team. You know, they had a casting team, they had a full-on like filming team, they had a studio at their disposal, none of which I had. I had to book a studio, I had to pay the videographer, I had to do all the casting myself. And so there was no way that I was equipped to kind of compete with those guys. I didn't have anywhere the same budget as they did. And I was really, really upset for a very long time because you're competing against, it's like, you know, if you're a little bookstore and you're competing against a giant bookstore, like that movie, what is it? Male, you know, the one with Tom Hanks. There's a little bookstore and there's a giant bookstore, and you're competing against, you know, that giant bookstore. It's impossible. And that's kind of how I felt. And so I thought I can either compete with these guys or I could do something completely different that they cannot do. And, you know, I chose the second option. It was also better in terms of Instagram for me to pivot to on the street interviews, because studio interviews don't do well on Instagram. And so that choice allowed me to grow my Instagram. And I see their Instagram, they don't have a face to the brand. They're just like a factory, right? And so they don't have that human interaction that I'm able to have with my people. And in that sense, their YouTube channel is big. They're probably earning a lot, but they don't have an Instagram page. They don't have a TikTok page, or at least one that is, you know, big. Like no one really cares about theirs because it's, again, it's a factory. It's not a person. And that human element is really missing from their page. And in that sense, I was able to kind of not exactly outdo them, but at least pivot to the direction that felt more right for me. So I'm happy about that. And at this point, I never even check back and see how they're doing. All their videos are quite repetitive and it's the same kind of thing. But they have, you know, they have a format. They're a bit like BuzzFeedy kind of style, just like dish out video after video after video. And so if that works for them, if they're getting money, good for them. But yeah, it doesn't affect me the way it did before. But before I was like crying and I felt like garbage.
In that moment, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry that happened. That's so horrible. In that time when you were distraught, where you were crying and stuff, what was the point where you made the decision to pivot, to not let this make you just give up on what you're doing, but that you're going to take a different direction, which also well done. I think it's amazing. I love your short form content with the street interviews. Yeah, so where did it sort of change from being really heartbroken to being like, okay, I'm going to shift my focus?
I think it took me maybe I think it took me a few months. I don't really remember the timeline, but I just remember looking at their content daily and just hoping that their channel is going to get shut down. At one point it did, and then it came back out and I was like, you know what? I can't be sitting around hoping that something is going to happen to their channel, because it won't. And even if it does, like, am I going to now really, like, my self-worth is going to be based on the fact that their channel is not working? Well, what if someone else starts a studio channel and they do one about cultures? Am I going to be competing with them? So it wasn't just that, it was the fact that I really wanted to have a conversation with people that were living in their home countries, because it's one thing to have somebody who left Poland when they were like 12, like me having left Russia when I was 12. I cannot speak to you about what's happening right now. So it's it's a completely different thing. And I also didn't really want to be tied to Toronto. I didn't really want to be here looking for a studio and having to do this filming. It was too much. It was too much effort. It was too much work. It just didn't really seem worth it as well.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you for sharing that. How do you approach setbacks or rejections now? What is your relationship with them when they come? Because I feel like they always keep coming.
I wish I could tell you I'm really strong and I handle them well. I have a pretty reactive personality. So I have two issues with my personality. One, that I sometimes don't do boundaries really well. I think a lot of women, we struggle with this because we're kind of taught to be agreeable and nice and pleasant. And I've had this issue with working with assistants where I can get close to people really fast. And with my videographer, for example, we worked together for a very long time. And in hindsight, I wish I didn't really start treating it as a friendship, because once you become really, really personal with each other, it's really hard to go back and say, well, I don't really like the way you handled that, because you're now on a more personal level. And so for me, at least, it's really hard to become friends and then have confrontation with people. Whereas if you keep things more business and professional, it's easier to say that wasn't really done to the best of your abilities, or, could you do that differently? It's not taken as personally. So I think if I could go back and kind of tell myself what I could have done differently, was don't get close to people really, really fast. Because people, unfortunately, this is a hard lesson I had to learn. And that I always thought that, the nicer you are to people, the nicer they are to you. Well, that's not unfortunately always true. I think people sense weakness and people can take advantage. And so if they think you're really, really nice, they don't take you as seriously sometimes. They realize, okay, she doesn't really have enough boundaries. She's really nice. I can kind of take advantage of her, or at least I don't have to respect her as much. And so I'm still working on that. And that's why it's been a little bit hard for me to even kind of delegate certain things, because with my last assistant, she was great, but we got really, really close to each other, started exchanging like personal information and almost becoming like friends. And it's difficult because she's still your assistant and you still have to tell her to do things, but now you feel weird about the dynamics have shifted. And so that was one of the things I really struggled with. And another one I think is that I need to breathe and think on things before I react. I react really quickly, gutturally, and I respect people that are able to take their time. They can answer calmly but firmly. Whereas if someone sends me an email, the other day, I I don't know if I can tell you about it, but I did a podcast, and they basically invited me on to talk about my dating experience or my dating insights. And so they'd assumed I was a dating coach for whatever reason. They didn't do the research on me. And I was really open and transparent about the fact that I offered, dating insights from around the world. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I can tell you how it's done around the world, right? And so I don't think they really knew that, because they called me a dating coach a couple of times during the podcast. And I did that podcast. I really prepared for it. They sent me the questions. Those questions weren't on the podcast for whatever reason, but okay. And so they get back to me and they say, well, we're not going to air your episode because you didn't give us, they said you didn't give us any advice on how to navigate cross-cultural relationships, which I really did. So that was really weird. But right away, like my inclination was to send back an email being like, I just wasted 2 hours. I can't believe, but for me also that was lack of respect, because for me, I do, research on the person that I'm inviting and I realize that their time is valuable. And so for me, that was kind of a personal disrespect in terms of, okay, if you don't want to have me on the show, that's fine, but at least do some basic research on me. That's not a great example of me being reactive, because I really did, I cleaned that up really well, but that was really frustrating. And so I'm happy I did that, because I was really frustrated. But in many ways that, where people have written to me and I wish I'd taken a pause before responding, because there's nothing worse than sending an email and then sending another email. But just in case, and it just sounds it screams childish. It's like you're unable to contain yourself. You're unable to deal with things. And unfortunately, business, these things come up all the time. Things don't work according to plan. Things backfire, especially when you're dealing with people. especially when you're dealing with people. It's really hard to control all elements of it. So I think just being reactive and or not being reactive and having a boundary are two really really strong suggestions I would advise to myself. If I could go back in time, but I'm still working on it, so it's not like it's a fixed problem.
Same here. Thank you for sharing that. I completely relate to. I'm very conflict avoidance, and I would rather stick needles in my eyes than have to be direct about something unpleasant. Still working on that, and yeah, also totally relates to the feeling very reactive to rejection. I always say I thought that I evolved over it, because I think that I'm less reactive to certain rejections, but then a different kind of rejection will happen, and I get very reactive. My emotional brain takes over, and it's like, oh, it's still there. It's still something I struggle with. So yeah, I completely relate. I have two final questions before we wrap up. My second to last question, and I usually ask an iteration to everyone, and I think you're perfect to ask this because you have done so well in growing your channels, is I am very delusional about growing this channel, and I would love to know if you have any advice for me on growing this show. From what I've garnered from this episode, it's be obsessed, be consistent, keep going, and I guess finding your niche. You found a very great niche. Is that right? Anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I think these are all great. I think I think the niche is important not only because, oh, well, it has to be someone that no one else is doing, something that no one else is doing, sorry. It has to be something that you're genuinely interested in, because growth can be slow. And if you're just doing it for the money or for success, well, that might not come really fast. And people can tell if you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I think if you're genuinely curious and obsessed and interested and you can't get enough of what you're doing, then that's already the first step to success. That's already success, because that means you're playing the game of longevity, not just the short-term outcome. And if you're doing that, well, then you can stay on the treadmill longer than everyone else, because you just have that inner drive to keep exploring that topic. And, for example, with your topic, you're curious about people. It's obviously a personal topic to you as well, and you're interested in the not so perfect, picture perfect side of people, right? Which I think is really interesting, and it's that curiosity, right, that drives you to keep producing podcasts. So I think it's part of it is just really picking the niche, not that is right, but that is right for you. It's kind of again like picking the right person for you, picking the right place for you. It's for you. Because there's always going to be an audience that can relate to that. There's always going to be people. There are YouTube channels about building fences. Who cares about building a fence or, fishing or, really niche, weird things? But there's always an audience for that, no matter how quirky the topic is. And so the one thing that really bugged me when I was starting my YouTube channel is I would go to a YouTube event and I would ask people, well, what do you do? And they'll say, yeah, I have a YouTube channel. Okay, well, what is the topic? Yeah, it's like lifestyle, DIY, whatever. Yeah, that's not a niche topic. That's everyone else is doing that. And you're just basically getting on that train to become successful. Half of those people, if not all of those people, have burnt out because they weren't picking something that really resonated with them. They're picking something because it was popular. So I think that's number one. And of course, if you can pick something that is true to you, then you'll show up. And people don't really understand that a lot of it is not glamorous work. A lot of it is routine and boring. It's just that you have to do it every single day, and some episodes are going to be better. Some episodes are going to be worse. Some days you really don't feel like doing it, but you do it. And then I think it's not just consistency, but it's also producing an episode and thinking, what can I do better next time, right? Just a little bit of that. Like the Japanese, they kind of do that progress by they say 1% or something, a little bit more each day. And I think someone else has referred to it, the Diary of the CEO, Steve Bartlett. He's talked about the 1%, and I think there's a lot of truth to it because people think I'd rather do it really well or not at all. Well, you're not going to be good the first time you start. You're going to be crap. Sorry, just for my French. But when I listen to my earlier episodes, when I listen to my earlier stuff, it's horrible. I don't think I'm incredible. I'm an incredible speaker these days, but you do learn. And so the more you do, you just have to put things out there because action brings more action and action brings confidence. And the more you do it, the more you learn from it and the more you refine your skills. If you're just sitting back and thinking, well, it needs to be perfect. Well, if you're not doing anything about it, you're just going to psych yourself out essentially, right? So if you're putting out episodes every single week and you're kind of refining your skills, at some point, you're going to get to the place where you feel like, okay, I'm really confident in this. And you're never going to be 100% confident, obviously, but you're going to get better at things, And people think, oh, well, it just takes one viral video. Yeah, but in order to get the viral video, you need to do a ton of videos, right? It's just that I think it's better to get viral or to become popular once you earn it. Because if you become popular too soon, you don't have the skills yet. And so I think it's really worthwhile when you get to that point, to really earn it and to really feel like, okay, now I'm at a place where I can actually do something with it, as opposed to, oh, that video went viral for the wrong reasons. And now you're big and you don't know how to deal with that. You don't have the skills. You don't have that confidence. You don't have the knowledge in your subject yet. So yeah, I think it's like a mixture of those things, but I do think the person that is the most obsessed with their topic wins in the end, just because they can keep going when everyone else is done.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Marina. That's such great advice. I totally agree. Focus on action, and action brings confidence. If people take away anything from this episode, I hope it's that, and of course everything else. But yeah, you're such a great example of that, so I really appreciate you sharing all of that. My final question for you is for people who want to get in contact with your content, maybe work with you or hire you as a speaker. Where should they start? And yeah, what should they know?
Yeah, please hire me as a speaker. I really want to do more speaking gigs just because I love the travel aspect of it. So they can find me on Dating Beyond Borders, literally on every platform, minus Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, but also under my name, Marina Iakovleva. And also I have a podcast called Dating Beyond Borders podcast. So very easy to find. And basically, yeah, I'm all over those platforms. And if you shoot me an email, which is also readily available, I'm happy to talk to you about speaking at your event. I'm speaking at one in July in London, and I'm excited about it. So yeah, I would absolutely love to do more of these, and I would love to do a TEDx. That's like that's my next goal. It's like visualize it and hopefully it's going to happen. So hopefully I get to do that as well.
Yes, manifesting this. Well, Marina, thank you so much for coming on here. And anyone listening who's involved in the events committee of, booking keynote speakers, please hire Marina. It's been such a pleasure. It's been, such a great episode and filled with so many gems.
Alice, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this episode because I don't get to open up so openly on podcasts usually. And so this was really interesting. It was like a therapy session that I kind of went through my life and all the things that I did wrong and all the things that I did right. So thank you again.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper.